So I get a lot of questions on how to backlap my Rolux mower. So if you know anything about real mowing, you do need to backlap it once in a while. So specifically today I'm going to be covering how I personally backlap my Rolux mowers. Small disclaimer, this is how I've been doing it for the last 2 years. There's multiple ways of backlapping. Everybody's got their own ideas, but this is how I personally do it. If you do a step a little bit differently, go ahead and leave it in the comments and maybe it'll help somebody out in the future. So there's a couple tools that you're going to need. Without these tools, you probably won't be able to backlap, but we're gonna go over these, the minimal tools that you'll need for this job. So first is going to be 13mm wrench, 10mm wrench, and a 13mm socket. Another thing that you'll need is gonna be a brush and backlapping paste. I personally use 120, but if you haven't backlapped in a couple years or a year, it's been a long time, you may wanna start with 80 grit and then work your way up to 120. But I personally use 120 because I do backlap consistently. Another thing that you'll need is some printer paper or some index cards or playing cards or whatever it is. At the end, I'll cover which one is gonna be better for you, but printer paper or an index card or playing cards or something like that. Next, you're gonna need some sort of drill, whether that's a battery drill or a plug-in drill. I prefer this method because I don't have to worry about batteries, it plugs right in and I always have power. You wanna avoid anything that's like a hammer drill. On these mowers, there's actually a safety mechanism that prevents the nut from turning if you're using a hammer drill or an impact drill. If you use an impact drill or hammer drill, you could bypass that safety sensor and you could strip the bolt. So stick to something that's either battery powered or plug-in. And then regardless if you're using plug-in or battery, you're gonna want to get a socket adapter and then 19mm socket. Next, you're gonna need something that lifts the front roller off the ground. I've been using this rubber chalk for the last couple years. It was about $7 from Harbor Freight. It's worked great. You can also use the grass catcher that came with your mower. This also sets the mower at a good angle and it tips it back and you can tip it back on this. A couple of optional items that I'm gonna be using today, but actually helps out greatly is, this is from Rolux. This is their bed knife cleanup tool or bed knife buddy, whatever you wanna call it. But this thing, after using it, I couldn't believe that I didn't have it in my arsenal before it. Once you use it once, you'll figure out that this is an awesome tool to have. It cleans up the front of the bed knife really nicely and makes sure that there's no grass or rust or anything like that preventing the blade from cutting. So this, in my opinion, is optional, but it is an awesome tool. And then I like to use WD-40 at the very end. This just keeps the blades from getting rust on it, keeping it lubricated. So I just like to spray a little bit of WD-40 at the very end. So first question I want to answer is, how do you know when it's time to backlap? Well, the easiest answer to say is your grass is going to tell you. If your grass tips are starting to turn white or yellow, or they're starting to be a little bit torn like this, then you know it's time to backlap. A real mower should be cutting grass and it should look like this at the very top. Almost like scissors. And then second question I want to answer is, how often do I backlap? Well, I'm backlapping probably once every other month, especially during the height of the growing season, maybe once every 6 weeks. But I'm also checking that reel to bed knife probably every 2 to 3 mows. I'm not checking every single time. That is overkill. Again, going back to that first point is your grass is going to tell you when you need to change something. So very first step in backlapping your mower is we need to clean it. So now that we have it cleaned, I'm gonna go ahead and show you kind of the inner workings of the bolts and the reel to bed knife adjustment and all that stuff. So before you start turning wrenches, before you start messing with things, I'm gonna show you exactly how it works and then we'll get into it. So first off, we have sort of a double locking system on the Rolux. So the first bolt that you'll want to loosen when you get to that point is this locking nut right here. So this locking nut right here is a 13mm lock nut. This controls the bearings that hold the reel in. So when these are unlocked, you can turn these bolts up here and it will adjust the reel to the bed knife. So that's nut number one. Nut number two that's locking this in is going to be the one that is located underneath the thread that's touching the frame right here. You'll need to loosen that before you can tighten down the bolt that it's attached to. So those two nuts right there are going to be the locking nuts, and then right here is going to be the 13mm bolt that you adjust to get that reel to move up and down. So I wanted to show you that before we get started, just so you know what I'll be adjusting and what we'll be touching later. All right, so now we talked about that. Let's go ahead and take off this cover because that's the next step. We're gonna take off the cover, we're gonna locate the backlapping bolt, and we're gonna backlap. Oh, one quick thing. Never tilt your mower all the way back on its handlebars. In both the Honda and the Briggs engine models in their booklets, it says do not tilt it back more than 20 degrees. If you do tilt it back more than 20 degrees, you do risk hydrolocking your engine. All that means is when you go to pull the pull starter, it's stuck. What you'll have to do is take out the spark plug, and there's gonna be oil in there. You have to drain the oil, probably the gas, re-put new oil in, new gas in, and a new spark plug. It's a whole thing. So definitely do not lay your mower back. Do not tilt it back more than about 20 degrees. Otherwise, you do risk hydrolocking your engine. So remember that. So now that we got the cover off, this is the exact nut that you're looking for. This is the 19mm nut. This is the backlapping nut. So once you have your drill, your adapter, and then your 19mm socket, you'll put it on this, and then we'll be backlapping from there. And again, you can take something to hold that front roller up, or you can take the grass catcher, put it behind, and lay the handlebars on the grass catcher. That's gonna be a great angle for you. It's not gonna go past that 20 degrees. But today, I'm gonna be using just this chalk that I got from Harbor Freight. I'll actually link it down below. Some people have asked me about it. It's like $7 or $8. It's super cheap. It's what I've been using. They do make backlapping stands that are much more expensive. They totally work. They're totally perfect for it. I just like to use this. All right, so before I backlap, I do want to make sure that it's not touching on the right side or left side or whatever and not the other side. So make sure that it's fairly even, it's equally missing or touching the blade on every single side, because when you do start to backlap and you might be sharpening one side versus not, you could cone the blade, meaning one side is going to be smaller than the other, and at that point now you're running into issues down the road. So make sure that you're even on all sides. You can use a feeler gauge if you want to get really precise, so make sure that it's equal on both sides. Once we have it equal, we're going to go ahead and start to backlap. So I like to take my backlapping paste, just dip in my brush into it. And you don't want to get a ton of compound. Just enough compound like you're painting a corner or cutting in on a paint job or something like that. So just enough right here, and you're going to introduce it to the blade once it starts spinning. So the direction of your drill, you do not want to put it in reverse. Instead of screwing it in, if you're taking out a screw, that's the wrong way. You just want to put it in the normal position to where you're screwing in a screw, bolt, whatever it is. That will turn this backwards. You don't want to spin this forward like you're cutting. You want to do it the opposite direction of how you cut. So it'll go backwards, but this, your drill, will go forwards or tighten. So you want to have in the tighten setting. We'll put it onto the bolt right here, the 19mm bolt. Gonna get the paste on your brush, and you're gonna want to gently squeeze your drill. You don't want this flying. If it is flying, you're gonna get compound all in your face, and you don't want to do that. So make sure you got it at a nice speed, very controlled. You don't want to get out of hand. You want to make sure that you're very controlled. Once you've got it, and you start introducing the paste, you'll start hearing that grinding sound. So once you have it at a good pace, you're just going to wipe the paste on it the whole way across. When you hear that grinding, it means that the paste is honing itself with the bed knife underneath. If you don't hear that grinding, it may be too loose. So you may have too much gapping between the reel and the bed knife, and you need to tighten that a little bit. But when you hear that grinding, that means it's working. So you do it for a couple of seconds, and then you can reintroduce some more. And you'll hear it start to grind a little bit more. So as you're spinning and putting compound on it, you don't want to put too much. Too much is not better. You'll just make a mess out of things, and really the blade can only accept so much. So you'll just take a little bit, be painting it on there, and then when you start to hear that grinding sort of go away, you can introduce a little bit more and it'll start grinding a little bit more aggressive. All right, so now that we've backlapped, I did it for about 5 minutes total. So again, I'm using 120 grit. If you have never backlapped or your blades are just super dull, maybe you have a nick in it or something like that, I would go ahead and start with 80 grit and then clean it off, maybe tighten the reel to bed knife just a little bit by a hair, and then go to 120. What you're doing is sort of getting into sharpening a little bit by using the 80, then 120. But I'm using just the 120. If you are maintaining this a lot or it's fairly new, 120 is totally fine. Doing it for about 5 minutes, painting it on there. And at this point, we're ready to wash off this compound and then check the reel to bed knife tightness, make sure it's nice and tight, and cutting paper across. When you're cleaning it, make sure to keep in mind that you always want to go backwards. You never want to put the reel forwards like when you're cutting, because that could take some of the compound and dull what you've just done. So make sure whenever you're changing the blades while you're cleaning, you go in a backwards position, just so you're not dulling the blade. All right, now is also a really good time just to clean it. If you've never cleaned in here, you can spray this off and then re-grease it at the very end. Just using an all-purpose grease, marine grease, whatever you find. But spray this off, make sure it's nice and clean, put some grease on it before we put the cover back on. So we've taken off all of the compound, we've dried it off as good as we can. So now it's time to make sure that it's sharp. So you can see that I got a piece of paper, a piece of printer paper that I cut into a strip, or a playing card. You can use either of these. Now, some people really like to hone it in and make sure that it's cutting paper or even thinner, newspaper, something like that. And while that's great and it's super awesome, and it's usually after it's been ground and it's nice and sharp, you can cut paper, you can get this thing dialed in to where it's cutting paper. But you can also use a playing card, you can also use an Uno card, you can use an index card, something like that. If it cuts this, I promise you, it will cut grass. If you've got it honed in to where it's cutting this and not cutting paper, take it out, test it out. If it's cutting your grass, it's cutting your grass. First off, you wanna focus on your grass. If your grass is shredding, obviously that means you need to hone it in a little bit better and maybe focus on cutting paper. But if you're cutting an index card or a playing card just fine and it's cutting your grass just fine, you're good. No adjustments needed. So I wanna make that clear is you do not have to use printer paper or specific backlapping paper or sharpness test paper. You can use an index card or a playing card. So right here you can see that I'm going to use this piece of paper and it doesn't cut it. It doesn't cut it at all on either side. It will not cut it, it's just gliding right across from it. It's touching it, it's gliding across, but it's not cutting it. However, I take this card right here, it cuts it perfectly on all sides, on the right, the left, and in the middle. And the blade spins nice and perfectly. You can stop here at this point. So let's just say it's not cutting either. Let's go ahead and tighten this in and make sure we can cut at least one of these. So first step, we're going to loosen the lock nuts that are on the bearing itself. These will be pretty tight, and you want them tight. If they're not as tight as possible, they could move while you're mowing, and that you just don't want that. So we're gonna loosen these nuts. And then next, we're going to loosen these lock nuts that are on the 13mm bolt that is in control of the reel to bed knife height. All right, now that we've got the lock nuts loosened up, it is very key here that you do not make large movements. Tiniest of movements is going to be just good enough. You do not want to move this thing an inch, you want to move it by just a hair. So start by turning those bolts maybe like a 1/16 of a turn. Try that, lock it all in, and see where you're at. Another key is you don't want to tighten one further than the other. Again, remember I mentioned coning. You don't want one side touching the bed knife and the other side not, because that's going to throw off your reel. So tighten them all the same and then lock everything in, and we're going to do another paper test. So I've got those bolts tightened down by just a hair, and you can already hear that we have slight reel to bed knife contact. You can hear that sort of drag that's going on. All right, so regardless if you're using paper or a card, this is about the maximum tightness that you want. If you can't spin it and it spins a good couple blades, it's way too tight. If it is too tight, you'll do a lot of damage to it, a lot of premature wear on your bearings and your reel and your bed knife. If it is way too tight, and you're still not cutting paper or cutting cardstock or an index card, you may need to look at getting it ground. Take it to a professional grinder. They'll be able to grind it, reface it, resharpen it, and make sure that you're cutting good. But if you're just backlapping and you're wanting to cut paper or an index card, this is about as tight as I would let it go. Any tighter, just take it to a professional. So we've got it right here, and actually I've got it cutting paper right now. So right now it is cutting across the whole entire way. We're cutting paper the entire way. So right here, we are good to go. We're definitely cutting cardstock. So once we have it set, we're gonna make sure that everything is locked in. You wanna start with the bearings, the bearing nuts. You wanna make sure that those are nice and tight. Trying to strip those bolts at all, but you want to make sure that they're really tight because you don't want it moving anywhere. If it does move, then you have to restart this process all over again. To tighten up those bolts, recheck it, make sure it hasn't moved at all, and it hasn't. We still have that same exact contact that we've been having. And then you're going to want to tighten in those lock nuts. Recheck everything. And we're cutting cardstock. And we're actually cutting paper. So this right here, if you don't have any other tools or you're ready to go, this is perfect. There are a couple tools that I'm going to use and a couple more steps that I'm going to use just to make sure that we're perfectly cutting. So like I said at the very beginning, there is a bonus tool that I really like to use. This is the bed knife facing tool or bed knife buddy, whatever you want to call it. So all you'll do is just take this, there's a file on it, and you'll face that bed knife. You'll be holding the reel with your offhand and then using this to face the bed knife and make sure that there's no nicks or dings or grass or any debris that's kind of in the way. And you're gonna go over the face like I would say 3 to 4 times, just going back and forth, turning the reel as you go, and that's just gonna make sure that that bed knife is nice and sharp. Once we've got it swiped, making sure we cut paper again, this thing is cutting nice and good. Very final step that I like to do is just spray it down with a little bit of WD-40. It just keeps those blades nice and lubricated. I'll do this once in a while just to keep them nice, and it also helps keep that grass off of them. So that's how you backlap. We're good to go.